Do you see yourself as the rebel who challenges the status quo on skin health? Learn how to be a critical thinker, discover innovative solutions to skin conditions, and facilitate individualized healing on a deeper level with Truth Treatment Systems. Truth Treatment Systems provides you the products and tools to unveil the truth behind skin conditions. Sign up for a wholesale account today at truthtreatmentspro.com and receive 10% off your first order. That's truthtreatmentspro.com. This podcast is sponsored by LAMPROBE. LAMPROBE is a popular aesthetic tool that enables skincare practitioners to rapidly treat a wide variety of common minor skin irregularities, or MSI. Red MSI treated by LAMPROBE include dilated capillaries and cherry angiomas, yellow MSI, cholesterol deposits and sebaceous hyperplasia, and brown MSI treated include skin tags and more. LAMPROBE MSI treatments are non-invasive and deliver immediate results. LAMPROBE can empower your skin practice with these new and highly in-demand services. For more information, visit lamprobe.com. That's LAMPROBE.com. And follow LAMPROBE on social media at LAMPROBE.
Hello and welcome to ASCP and the Rogue Pharmacist with Benjamin Knight Fuchs. In each episode, we'll explore how internal and external factors can impact the skin. I'm Maggie Stasek, ASCP's Education Program Manager, and joining me is Ben Fuchs, skincare formulator and pharmacist. Hey, Ben.
Well, hello, Maggie. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So retinol, that's probably the number one go-to for anti-aging.
Pretty much. Vitamin C is right up there. I would say vitamin C and retinol. But retinol is really powerful. Vitamin C is not as potent and as powerful. In fact, in pharmacy school, we really study retinol or retinoids. Retinol or retinoids, OID, at the end of the word implies the whole family of molecules that are similar to vitamin A. Now, when we hear about vitamins, we typically think of molecules from a biochemical standpoint. The average person doesn't think this, but from a biochemical standpoint, molecules that assist chemical reactions. They help chemical reactions occur. Retinol or vitamin A is distinct in the world of vitamins in the sense that it doesn't just help chemical reactions. Doesn't just assist. It doesn't just facilitate chemistry. Retinol vitamin A actually activates chemistry. In that sense, we call it a hormone. So it's a vitamin because we have to ingest it, but it's a vitamin that has hormone-like properties, meaning it actually makes things happen. The word hormone means I make things happen in Greek. I arouse to activity. Hormeo, I arouse to activity. So it's much more fundamental and powerful in the world of biochemistry than an ordinary vitamin. And vitamin D is the same way. Vitamin A and vitamin D are hormone vitamins in the sense that they don't just help, they actually activate. And how do they activate? They activate like a hormone. They sit inside a receptor, which you can think of like a socket, like an electrical socket. That's what a receptor is. It's on the outside part of a cell. And when vitamin A interacts with that receptor, it's just like a plug going into a socket. When a plug goes into a socket, it initiates electrical energy. It forms a circuit so that electrical energy can flow into your light or into your computer or into whatever your electrical device is. That's kind of how a hormone works. A hormone is like a plug, and it sits into a socket on the outside of a cell, and it turns on chemical reactions via that plug and socket. They call it a lock and key effect, much more fundamental than vitamins, than ordinary vitamins. So vitamin A is a very, very fundamental molecule with lots of properties. And lots of properties for the skin. And that's what makes it such an important skincare ingredient because it's really handled very well by the skin. Not all ingredients, not all nutrients that have an effect on cells can be put on top of the skin, on the stratum corneum, and then have an effect. That's pretty amazing. Whenever you find a molecule that you can put on the surface of the skin, which we know is dead, made up of dead cells, and it can have an effect down below, that's pretty amazing in the world of ingredients. There's not a lot of ingredients that do that. And there's certainly not a lot of ingredients that do that with the intensity of vitamin A. Generally, that makes vitamin A, if not the most important ingredient you could put on your skin from an anti-aging and from a skin health benefit or skin health benefit perspective, it's right up there in the top 2 or 3. I consider it, I would have to say it's probably the number one most important ingredient in terms of its effects on skin cells when applied topically. Let's talk about it's a very confusing subject, vitamin A, because vitamin A is molecules that have vitamin A activity are found throughout nature. And that's really important. So when we talk about vitamin A, we typically we refer to the active form of vitamin A, which is called retinoic acid. The precursor to retinoic acid is called retinol. There's an intermediary step between retinol and retinoic acid called retinaldehyde. And those are the three main forms of vitamin A. There's a form of vitamin A that's used in ingredients called retinyl palmitate, but that has to be converted into retinol and then into retinoic acid to have its effects. So the most important forms of vitamin A are retinol and retinoic acid. Retinoic acid requires a prescription. That's the active form of vitamin A. Retinol is a precursor form to vitamin A, and that's available without a prescription. In nature, there are lots of molecules that have retinol-like effects, similar to retinol. They're chemicals that fit into that socket. They're not exactly retinols, but they're close enough that they'll fit into the socket and they can initiate some of these effects. So because, as you mentioned, retinol has some really aggressive effects on the skin, I'll explain what those are here in a moment, there's been a move to look for some of these molecules in nature that fit into the socket, but will have not the kind of intense effects that you get from retinol. Now, I'm coming from the world of pharmacy. In the world of pharmacy, I look for effects. In pharmacy, we're not interested in being timid. We really want to change the behavior of a cell. And while there are ingredients found in nature that will sit into that receptor, that socket, does that make sense how I'm explaining this?
Yeah.
That will sit into that socket, that will sit into that receptor, they don't have anywhere near the intensity of real vitamin A, of retinol. But because they're milder, there's some benefits for people who have skin sensitivities. Now, as you mentioned, what about people who are waxing? What about people who have sensitivities? Here's the issue. In order for retinol to activate, to have its activating effects, there is some inflammation that is involved. One of the mechanisms of action of these vitamin A molecules, retinol and retinoic acid, is they have inflammatory effects. Now, if your barrier, the skin barrier, is not intact, it's not strong, it's not healthy, some of those inflammatory effects can be very unpleasant. And that can make it difficult for people to use this wonderful ingredient. And so for those people, maybe the more milder forms of vitamin A, milder retinol-like molecules that are found in nature may be beneficial, but you're not going to get anywhere near the benefits that you are of retinol, which is why if that occurs, you have these sensitivities and it's too inflammatory, it can cause redness or irritation, and you don't want to use it. It's much better to strengthen the barrier than to try to go for an alternative that's going to be much weaker. And there are lots of alternatives, and the most famous one is bakuchiol these days, but there's lots of them out there. To me, it makes much more sense to strengthen the barrier so that you can use retinol. For example, if you want to work out, right? But you just got out of the hospital. You're not going to sit there on the bench and start lifting 225 pounds. You're going to work yourself in slowly. You're going to get your muscles developed so that you can lift heavier weights. I always use the exercise analogy because there's a lot of similarities between the effects of retinol on the skin and the effects of weightlifting, for example, on your muscles. What you're doing is you're creating an inflammatory stress on the muscles when you're lifting weights. And what is the body's response to that? Is to get bigger. I don't know if we've mentioned the word antifragile before. Have we talked about antifragility?
No, never heard that.
So there's this concept in biology and in systems theory called antifragility. So we know a fragile system is a system that breaks. It's fragile. A non-fragile system is a system that doesn't break. Your china is fragile. A steel bar is not fragile. But in biology and in certain systems, there's a third category of fragility called antifragile. And this is a system that doesn't break when it's like a fragile system, and it doesn't not break like a non-fragile system. It responds to stresses by growing. This is what antifragile systems do. They respond to stresses by growing. There's a simplistic idea that if a system creates irritation, if an ingredient creates irritation or a process creates irritation in the skin, that's to be avoided. It turns out that in order for a system to grow, a stress has to be put on the system. We have this kind of misunderstanding about stress in the sense that we want to avoid stress at all costs. You can't grow without stress. Your muscles can't grow without stress. Your brains and your synapses can't develop without stress. And likewise, your skin can't grow without stress. Living systems are antifragile. They grow in response to stress, if that stress is done strategically. And by strategically, I mean balanced with rest and sustained with nutrition. With rest and nutrition, you can leverage stress. You don't want to avoid stress. You want to leverage it. You want to take advantage of it. So to me, yes, you can say, oh, I'm not going to use retinol or retinoic acid because it's irritating. I'm going to use some of these alternatives, but you're not going to get the benefits. The alternatives are extremely mild. They have some retinol-like activity, mostly in a test tube or in a petri dish. In real life, in vivo, as we say, very, very mild, almost insignificant benefits from things like bakuchiol, which is the most famous one, but there's extracts found in sage and vitex and valerian and marigold and various cypress plants that have these retinol-like effects. It turns out that retinol is a fatty molecule. And wherever you find unsaturated fats, you'll find a certain amount of retinol-like activity. So these plants that I mentioned have these kind of phytonutrients that are fatty. Those have retinol-like activities, including bakuchiol. Omega fatty acids, fish oil, contains something called DHA, which has retinol-like activities. Even linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 fatty acid, has retinol-like activities. There are molecules that are found in dairy and also in meat called phytol and phytonic acid, which also has retinol-like activities. And you can use all of these if you want to orally or even topically if you want to get some retinol benefits, but they're not going to be anywhere near like retinol or retinoic acid. So if you find yourself unable to use retinol or retinoic acid, focus on strengthening the barrier. Now, there's a couple ways to strengthen the barrier. Ironically, one of the best ways to strengthen the barrier is to use retinol and retinoic acid. So it's kind of like a catch-22. So it's like if you're going to the gym, you're going to get bigger if you lift weights, but if you're weak, you might get hurt if you lift weights. So what do? You start slowly. You build it up. You don't start off with like 0.1% retinoic acid. You start off with 0.05 or 0.025 or 0.01 retinoic acid. You don't start off with 5% retinol. You start off with 0.5% retinol, and you build up the barrier slowly. And we do find that people get used to retinol and retinoic acid over time. So you can start off slowly and build yourself up. There are also wonderful nutrients that will help strengthen the barrier. Omega fatty acids have a barrier strengthening effect. Niacin has a barrier strengthening effect. Vitamin C has a barrier strengthening effect. Lecithin and phospholipids have a barrier strengthening effect. Also, if you're not healthy, if you're not nutritionally sound, if you're not absorbing, say, your essential fatty acids or your phospholipids, work on digestion. Work on perhaps use digestive enzymes with your meals, lipase with your meals, pancreatin with your meals, lecithin with your meals to improve absorption of these fats. Also, if you have food allergies or food intolerances or leaky gut, work on the digestive system. To say, I'm just not going to use this ingredient because I have a problem, it deprives you of the most powerful anti-aging ingredient that's available, with maybe the exception of vitamin C. But I would say retinols and retinoids are even more important than vitamin C. Sure, there's alternatives, like I say, phytonic acid or phytol or omega fats or bakuchiol or honochiol or valerian or vitex. There's lots of different things that you could do. Like I say, they're found throughout nature, but you're not going to get anywhere near the benefits that you are going to get from retinol and retinoic acid.
So you had mentioned retinol palmitate. Why would somebody choose that over
Because it's extremely mild. There's many steps that are required for the retinol palmitate to get converted into retinoic acid and retinol. And while it does happen, it happens very slowly and it doesn't happen really effectively. It does happen though. It's also readily available. And companies like using retinol palmitate because you do get some skin softening effects. You don't necessarily get the really genetic effects. And that's really where retinol and retinoic acid get their claim to fame in terms of effects, is they manipulate genetics. And this whole process is really fascinating. So you put your retinol in your body or on your skin. That retinol has to be attached to what's called a binding protein. And that binding protein attaches to the retinol, whether you're applying it topically or you're taking it internally. And then the binding protein takes the retinol to the cell, and then that cell will take the retinol off the binding protein and put it on what's called a retinoic acid receptor. And then that retinoic acid receptor manipulates the genetics. And this is how retinols have their effect. Most of their effects are affecting at the genetic level. For retinol palmitate to go through all those steps to get to the retinoic acid receptor in order to initiate the genetic changes, the epigenetic changes really, by the time you get that ingredient to the gene, you're going to have trace amounts of it. So it has some effects, very, very little. Most of the effects of retinol palmitate are surface. It's cheap. It's found in a lot of products. It doesn't cause any problems for people. So you'll see it in a lot of skincare formulations, but you're not going to get the real anti-aging benefits that you're going to get from retinoic acid and retinol. The third ingredient that I mentioned, retinaldehyde, is a pretty potent ingredient, but it's very unstable. So it's not really practical to use it in skincare products, although there is a form of retinaldehyde that is in a bubble, like a liposome. And that kind of protects the retinaldehyde a little bit. But the problem is you can't get very much retinaldehyde in the bubble. So retinaldehyde-containing products, first of all, the companies never tell you how much is in there because it's embarrassing. There's like trace amounts of retinaldehyde in there. And you're really not going to get the dramatic effects that you get with retinol or retinoic acid in high concentrations. In pharmacy, we say the dose makes the medicine, and you have to have enough of the ingredient. And this is the problem also with natural analogs of retinoids. You don't really get the intense dose that you do from retinol and retinoic acid. There's really no substitutes, even though companies will market them as being gentler and more natural, perhaps, but you're really not going to get the great benefits that you do from retinol and retinoic acid.
That concludes our show for today, and we thank you for listening. But if you just can't get enough of Ben Fuchs, the ASCP's Rogue Pharmacist, you can listen to his syndicated radio program at brightsideben.com. For more information on this episode, or for ways to connect with Ben Fuchs, or to learn more about ASCP, check out the show notes.